how's it going? My name is Wayne. Today I'm going to show you what a social media backend looks like. As you know, you can make a front-end version of the app, you can make a back-end version of the app, and you put it together and you make a full stack app. With a social media like Facebook or Instagram, we have many users. The users can have friends, and the users can have dots, and those dots can have responses. In another way to say it is you can have users, friends, comments, and replies. Today I'm going to show you what the back end of social media looks like, and in a future video I'm going to incorporate that back end into a front end app like React. So we're using a MERN stack. For the social media API, we're going to have a database using Mongo and Mongoose, and we're going to have a RESTful API routing system using Express. Of course, it's all Node, so Node ties it all together. I make this repository called Social Media API. My username is Siphon880GH. Feel free to visit, look around if you want to hire me. It's Social Media API. First step you want to do to test it out to see if it's the backend that you want to incorporate in your social media app is to go to the repository and to check out the installation instructions. First, you download the repository to your local host. Then you're going to run npm install to install all the node modules that, of course, it's going to be in a git ignore so it doesn't cause redundant space usage. And then once you install the node modules, you actually need to start the mongod process, which is your Mongo database server. You need to start it where you run the API, and in this case it's local machine. Next is you have a fresh copy, so you may want to have data in the database. That's up to you. If you don't, you're going to have to use the API endpoints to create user, to create the dots, and to create directions. And if you want, you can create the friends. But if you want some data to start off with, you can run npm run seed. Okay, now that's seeded, we can focus on testing the endpoint. Because remember, the MongoD database server is running. Looking at number 4, you actually have to start the Express app to make sure it's listening at port 3001 so that you can call this URL and start requesting information. To get to the a checklist of all the API routes for my backend, you can click the API route checklist, and we can go through each single one of them and then check them off as we go through them. You can get all the users, you can create a user, you can indicate that specific user in the URL, and with that you can get their information, update the information for that user, delete that user, and so forth. You can have that kind of scheme for friends, for dots, which is similar to comments, and for reactions, which is similar to replies to the comments. Let's start walking through them. For testing the API, obviously all GET routes you can do in the browser directly, like localhost 3001 and so forth. But you have other methods like post, put, and delete. So you want to use an API test tool like Postman or Insomnia Core. For here, we're using Insomnia Core. This is the bottom portion of my screen. I saved some requests so it makes things easier. The first request we're going to work through is to get all users. Let me zoom this in. And that's exactly what I'll do. I'll just get all the users. Notice it's an array of objects. This is test user 3, test user 2, test user. Now test users, as part of the seed, the test user already have its own dot or its comment. I am thinking of, that's the content of that dot. So this is now done. Next, we want to create another user, right? To create a user, you're going to change the get to a post, and you need to send it some body in the request. For here, under Insomnia Core, we'll make sure it's a JSON body under post. Make sure there's curly brackets. This will be similar to a form where you're creating a new user or you're signing up, and it's going to send that information as through fetch or Ajax, for example. We're going to click send, and what you see on the right, let me zoom in, is that the new user is created, and you can confirm that the user is created by showing all the users, get API/users. And at the very bottom of this array of objects, you have a new object, and that new object is the new user for demo. Perfect, now that's checked off. Moving on, now part of the API endpoint, we can also specify the specific user. That's the user ID. Every single user has a user ID. The field is _ID, that's created by Mongoose and Mongo. I'm going to copy this, and I'm just going to paste it at the end of the URL. That fits the schema here, API user / make sure that your API endpoint matches exactly. Well, you should be getting the specific information for that user. Actually, let me make sure I'm not overriding all my other saved requests. Okay, all other requests I'm going to use here. Okay, so get API/user / the user ID. I'm going to click send, and then it's going to get that specific user information. It can also have users and friends, but for this purpose, we haven't created any dots or friends for this user, but you can test it on another user. Test user has dots, right? This is a test user. It has its own dots, so you can copy the ID, go here, get its information, and you see his dots show up here as well using the specific ID endpoint. So that proves that you can pull off dots for that user. Now I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna keep using the same ID as the new user for demo. Let me switch it back to that user. So it's a matter of switching this portion of the URL. So this is done. Next, you want to be able to update the user. For example, let's just say I changed my email address. I want to update my email. First, you want to make sure you have the curly brackets. This would be the JSON body that you're sending, and the URL is correct, and the method is correct. It's a put method. We're going to change the email to a time. What time is it right now? 2:26. And then we're gonna click send. You know it went through because it sends you back that specific user with its new email address. And of course, you can get that specific user information back by changing the method to get, and make sure that the email is indeed updated, which it is. I'll check that off. Next, you want to be able to delete the user. I'm going to show you all the users again. As you can see, the new user is still there with its new email address that we just updated. This is the array of all the users. What we're going to do is same URL except the method changes, right? The method is now delete, so we're going to go and delete this user. You don't need a JSON response, sorry, a JSON body for that. We're going to click send, and it'll tell you message deleted user, and this is the user that you deleted. So if you go back to show all users, you're going to rerun this query API/users using get method, and you will see that the array no longer has that user, test user 3, test user 2, test user, along with its dot. So that checks off this API endpoint. So you have basic user operations here. You also have friends. Friends follow a little bit different, well, I would say extended URL. As you can see, there's API, users, user ID. That's what we've been doing. For that specific user have friends. So it makes sense that part of the URL, you're going to have a friends path. And um, for you to add a friend is just another user. So you can grab that other user's ID and add it to the URL. And so you'll have the user ID and you have the friend ID. And depending on the method, if it's post, you're gonna add that friend to that user's friend list, or you're gonna delete that friend from that user's friend list. So let's make sure we have the correct user IDs we want. Let's just say test user has dots, but he doesn't have any friends. He's kind of lonely. Let's add test user 2 to test user 1's friend list. So for test user, the ID is such as this, and the test user 2, this is the ID. I'm just going to use my address bar as a notepad for now. Other requests. So this is test user, and the other user ID that we're going to add to that test user's friend list is this second one. So the URL API/user/user ID/friends/friend ID, and you have to make sure it's a post request. Now we're going to send it. So perfect. What ends up happening is this is test user. Remember, the test user has its own dots, but now its friend is no longer empty. The friend has a new object, and that object is test user 2. So test user 2 is now a friend of test user. And again, you can always go back and show all the users, which is useful in Insomnia Core or Postman to save a collection of requests that you can always go back to. And going back to this test user, now the dots array and the friends array are not empty. So this is now checked off. Next, we're going to delete. We're going to delete that friend. So going back here, instead of posting it, remember the URL is the exact same thing, except we're just going to change the request to delete. So we're going to delete it now. So they became enemies. Let's press send. And there it is. We have a message: deleted friend and updated the friend list of the associated user. And this is the new user information. Test user now no longer has any friends. It's back to an empty array. And you can show all users to confirm that. Friends is now empty. Dots remain unchanged. So that's checked off. Next is the dots. Remember, dots is similar to comments. Users can make their own dots. You can get all the dots that exist by just doing something really similar to showing all the users, API/users, but instead it's API/dots. I already have a request here to save. It's API/dots. We're gonna make sure it's get, and then we're gonna send the request. And it's an array. It's always gonna be array because it's all the dots, but there's only one dot. As you saw from all the 3 users, only one of the users have a dot, so that makes sense. That's from the seed. So that is done. Next, we're going to create a new dot and push it to the associate users dot array. So as a reminder, test user has only one dot. We can add another dot. So to do that, you go to localhost 3001, and it's going to be API/dots, and then you're going to be making a post. And it's very similar, like in the front end app, you're going to have a form, and from the form you're going to create a new dot, and it's going to make a fetch request or AJAX or Axios. But for testing purposes, make sure the JSON has curly brackets, the dot's username is there, and you have some kind of text you want. There's no reason to make a dot without any text. I am another dot. That would make sense. So post to API dots to this user, test user, I'm another dot, you click send. Perfect. Now this returns the user whose dot array has been affected. Notice the dot now has 2 dots. So that's done. We were able to create a new dot. What you want to do next is, in terms of the URL, you want to reference that specific dot, then you'll need to have the ID of that dot. Again, Mongoose is creating _ID for every single new document you're creating or new object you're creating. I am another dot. This is the ID. So it's API/dot/.id. You can get that information and you click send. It's gonna pull off that specific dot. Notice that it's just that dot object. There's nothing else. So that works. Next, you want to be able to update that dot. I am another dot. Let's add an exclamation mark. Now the JSON request body, make sure let's add an exclamation mark. There, it's valid JSON. Make sure the method is correct. It's put. The URL is correct. You're gonna send it, and notice that say I am thinking of another with an exclamation mark. And again, you can always confirm it by showing all users. And for test user, you still have 2 dots, and the new dot has an exclamation mark. Perfect. So that's done. Next, you're gonna delete the dot. Let's just say, again, a dot is like a comment. I want to remove this from my profile or whatever that you use in your app. What you can do is same URL, right? But except it's a delete method. You're not gonna need the JSON body. I'm gonna delete the specific dot by its ID, send, and then it says dot deleted and dot also deleted from the associated user. So it's showing you the user and it's showing you its only dot. It used to have 2 dots, but now it's back to 1 dot. So that's done. Next is the reactions. This is the final part of demonstrating my API. For the reactions, you're reacting to a dot. So for example, in the Facebook case, you make a comment and then someone else replied to your comment. That's a reaction. For that, you need to have the dot ID, because a reaction goes specifically to a dot. We just deleted this dot, so it's not going to work. What I would do is I'm going to show all the users again, and remember that test user has a dot that came from the seed. It's called I am thinking of, so it's perfect. We can use this. I'm going to use the dot ID from that dot, and I'm going to change the dot ID here so I can reference it. And then we're going to create a response to it, right? And the JSON body, that reaction body, I'm reacting to your dot, and it's a post request. So let's send it. My apologies, the JSON might be a little incorrect. Get rid of the comma, send it. So you're like, what's going on? Well, it's because the URL is incorrect. So you have dot and the dot ID, but you have to make sure there's a reaction at the end. The URL tells you what is being done. You're posting, and there's a reaction body, send. There you go, perfect. So you have a comment or a dot. This is a dot text I'm thinking of, and then you have a reaction. I am reacting to your dot. You can also show all the users, and you'll see that test user has a dot, and the dot has a reaction. Now the last thing we're going to show is deleting For deleting, follows a similar format. You want to specify the reaction ID just like you specify the dot ID. So make sure to copy this reaction ID. Notice that this time there's no underscore ID. The reason for that is very technical. It's because I'm nesting a schema instead of referencing a model. But anyways, that's part of how mongoose work. You'll know when you delve into my code. Because remember, the dots have a underscore ID, but the reaction doesn't. And you'll see the differences if you try to incorporate my code into your front end app. Now you're gonna delete this reaction, so you need to have a reaction ID. See API dots dot ID reactions reaction ID. Make sure it's correct. Delete. You don't need the JSON body. Send. And then this is perfect. This is a dot I am thinking of. You notice reactions is now empty. It's an empty array because it's now erased. At the top right, it shows you all the mongoose database manipulation. So that's very cool to have that on the side as well while I'm doing the API testing. So that concludes the demonstration. I hope you like this. If you decide to incorporate my backend to your front end app, you can of course make this API more sophisticated, but for now it has users, friends, comments or dots, replies or reactions. I'm going to quickly show you how the app looks. So you have an idea on how to incorporate this. Again, a future app, I'm going to show you how I incorporate this into a React app to make a full MERN full stack app. You have server.js. I'm going to make this bigger, which starts the Express server, and it starts the Mongoose connection. The Mongoose connection, I have it under config, uses the Mongoose node module. I create a database on Mongo called social media. If that database does not exist, then it's going to create that database for you. Next, I have server.js, which is the entry point. It's requiring the routes. The routes is index.js, and it's going to combine the API routes, which is inside the API folder, and it goes to index.js first, and it's going to combine the dot routes and user routes. The dot routes, you'll have all the API endpoints set up. For example, creating a reaction, but notice it's missing API/dots. It's because when you're combining dots routes and user routes under API, it's already wrapping all the other smaller paths into a more earlier path, /user/, and then the later path is /user ID. So all these inside the individual express routes are how Mongoose work. Mongoose is the ODM of Mongo database. You have models representing a collection in the database, and you have these different methods that help you do CRUD methods to manipulate or access that information from the database. Find one and delete is one of them. For the actual models itself, which the routes depend on, you create these schemas. Mongoose is a very fluent, non-strict kind of database, unlike MySQL, where you have to definitely define the schema and create associations, or how one table connects to another table. but it's good to have schemas so you don't mess up on the fields. So we have mongoose here creating these models, and each model or each collection would have these columns that your documents would follow. Um, so this would be user schema, yeah, which has a username, email, has a dots array, has a friends array, and we create virtuals, which are other kinds of uh, properties that are part of the model but not part of the database. We have very similar concepts to other database, like a field needs to be unique and it's required. We have other nice methods like trim that allows you to trim spaces or trailing spaces from the beginning and end of a string. We have validators. This one makes sure the email is the email. And as you see, dots and friends in a serialized database, you're joining the tables using associations. In the case of serialized, which is an arm of MySQL, here you're referencing the model. That's one way of joining tables or joining collections in Mongo. Another way, well, first of all, this way is going to create underscore ID. But another way is you'll see under dot is you don't reference it. You insert the schema directly into the array. This is the dot schema. But for the reactions array, you don't reference the table. You just put in the reaction schema. For this, it's not going to create underscore ID field. So you're going to have to create your own ID, like reaction ID, which is a type of schema.types.object ID, and you're going to have a default value. And this would return a object ID that the Mongo database makes for you. And that's basically how a backend using Mongo, Mongoose, Express, and Node works. And then you just have to incorporate this into a front-end app like a React app. I hope you find this video educational. I hope you decide to use my backend. In a future video, I'm going to show you how to incorporate this on the front end. My name is Wayne. I'm a web developer. If you like my content, feel free to subscribe, like, and comment. If you would like to hire me, feel free to message me or visit my GitHub or my LinkedIn. I'm signing out. Until next time, thank you for watching.